Theory and platform, we know that they're one part of the equation. Hearing from security leaders and putting all this into practice is the other half of the equation. So we've brought in two sharp minds in the cybersecurity industry, and we're going to be putting all the pieces right into place. I'm joined by Johnny Christmas, Global Head of Offensive Security at Kraft Heinz, and Marius Pocus, who is the Global VP of Cybersecurity and CISO at Glow Financial Services. These two are bringing together the offensive and defensive perspective and the production perspective as well. They're going to share how they're adopting autonomous validation, what's actually working, and how to bring the data back to the leadership in the language that they're going to actually understand. Bring your questions to the chat because the chat is wide open. Johnny, Marius, welcome to the summit.
Thank you for having us.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for having us.
All right, so let's kick things off with something that everyone's probably wondering. What is the current state of AI in your environment? Is this something that you're able to implement as fast as you would outside of work, or do you have to take things very slow given the nature of both of you all's organization and your work?
I can start with that. I think, one thing, everyone's rushing sort of headfirst towards AI implementation. And there's a gap that I think executives do not understand the risks that we are undertaking. It's okay to onboard AI tools, but the question kind of flips when you are thinking about, for example, cloud core work, OpenClaw. When you give access AI to your machines and, unrestricted permissions, we saw the headlines, Vercel, it's all of a sudden everything changes and flips. So I think I've always been a proponent of AI, and I always said, I've been talking a lot about how CISOs are struggling to get a seat at the table, how they're not being heard and supported. And I think pushing AI agenda allows you to do that. You can become a trusted advisor, pushing AI adoption forward, but with security in mind and proper provisions, without, blocking business, enabling innovation, safe experimentation. But we need to develop clear guidance and accountability across the whole business. You can adopt AI tools, but you need to do it safely with security provisions and get guidance from, people who understand this thing. Because, OpenClaw author himself came out and said, look, this tool is great, but it's not for non-technical people. You have to understand how to use it, how to deploy it, and how to secure it.
What about you, Johnny? How has all of this been manifesting in your world?
Those are all fantastic points. I could even just tack on to that, starting from the end and working backwards. OpenClaw, I've been calling it the modern LimeWire for how much of a nightmare it is causing to the computers of people who do not understand what it's doing and how it's doing it. AI is desperately attempting to be as user-friendly as possible and appeal to the greatest possible market, because these are companies who have to make money. They have to make an ROI on this insane level of investment that they're making on this. And to do that, they have to have every last human being on Earth using it. And so they're developing tools like OpenClaw, et cetera, to try and attract those people, but they're just not ready from a security and honestly, in most cases, a usability standpoint. And so we're seeing it destroying personal systems, which is just a horrible foot to start off on. But going all the way back to getting the CISO the seat at the table, this is such an immense, possibly unprecedented opportunity. Something we have not seen CISOs have the opportunity for since perhaps the Target and Home Depot breaches here in the US in what was that, around 2012, 2013, where companies had to stop and had no choice but to go to the CISO, or even back then get a CISO, and say, we don't know what we're doing and we need help. So now we have this technology that, honestly, if you had asked me 4 years ago, which are we going to get first, quantum computing or functional artificial intelligence? Absolutely. I think all of us would have voted quantum computing. Even in the face of, we've been using the phrase artificial intelligence in information security and indeed IT for 20 years. The reality was it was just machine learning, but companies like to call it AI. And now we have both, which is crazy. And it is exploding and everyone is using it. And I think companies are the right mentality, at least, is that your employees will be using this. The company will be using this. So you have blocking it is not an option. It's practically impossible. So what are you going to do as a company to make sure that it is used responsibly, safely, and ethically? And that's what's coming down to the CISOs, because of course the company's going to go to the security team because they're going to kick that can down to whoever they can, and they're going to say, "Oh, this is a security problem." This is your opportunity, CISOs, to step up and demonstrate your value and demonstrate that you have knowledge and capability and experience to be able to say, "This is what we need to do." And really, like, if you're trying to get your seat at the table, they're handing you one, and this is your opportunity to prove that you deserve it. So you got to really, really be on top of this game. And then, yeah, what's coming next? It is quantum computing. And so this is your trial for, are they going to come to you when the post-quantum conversations start? Or are they going to say, they don't really know what they're doing down there. We gotta go over their heads and figure this out on their own.
On one hand, people are saying AI is creating more threats because we're onboarding more tools and everyone's using open AI or Anthropic these days. And on the other hand, people are saying companies like Pocus are leveraging a lot of AI, so we're actually moving faster in a defensive state. I would love to hear both of you all's take on speed of attack compared to the speed of defense.
I don't think it's necessarily more threats, but I think it's, AI in the hands of untrained user creates risk. And that's, I think, the problem. I'm not against AI. I love AI. And I always say, I've been discussing these couple of phrases. AI, especially I think the latest sort of marketing headlines been pushing FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt around AI. And I always said, AI is not here to replace people. AI is a tool which allows you to do, I'll kind of talk about it being a force multiplier. It allows people to do more in capable hands, managing and leveraging AI. It's not going to, there've been a lot of talks about thinking that cybersecurity is going to disappear because AI is going to take over it. I don't believe in that. AI is going to help us to do more and achieve more, and there's no, there's no fear of it. But yeah, it's certainly can create more risks, and especially I think AI kind of created a shift. If you think about anything to do with IT previously, it could have been constrained within technology. Now AI, you're talking about ethical boundaries, you're talking about legal implications, you're talking about, if you add AI into your product, there is so many more cans you need to uncover about bias, ethical boundaries, and all of that. There's a lot of more questions, and business needs to be a lot more involved in decision making about AI adoption. So I think and that's what we've been talking about. I think CISO has an opportunity like never before to stand at the helm of it and guide the business from uncertainty into gaining a competitive advantage in this, strange world that we're living in now.
Yeah, that's it's a massive question. Marius, I think you and I would be great friends because we're very, very much on the same side of this argument. There's two things going on there. Again, to start at the end, the ethical boundaries of this are super interesting, and we're seeing the GRC teams getting involved in this new technology more than most other technologies you see, especially with the introduction of the EU AI Act, and which is perhaps accidentally a living document now. They're already amending it. They're trying to figure out exactly what this thing should say. And at the same time, we already have vendors out here saying, "Oh, we're going to help you comply with the EU AI Act." And I like to say, "Okay, can you tell me what the EU AI Act says we should be doing?" And they're also trying to get ahead of it. We have to get ahead of it, and that's really the only response. And that's going back to what I was saying before. You have to get ahead of this. Here at my company, what we did immediately is we stood up an AI data and ethics council. Any product that we're implementing that is going to be using artificial intelligence has to go through this board review that has, man, this questionnaire is an absolute, like, if you think vendor assessment questionnaires were a nightmare, this thing is absolutely insane. And it's because we're trying to be super cautious and super nervous. And what AI can do is moving so fast that we have to keep adding on questions to understand how this is operating. To go all the way back to, is it creating more threats or is it stopping more threats? I love Marius's pivot on that to say we shouldn't be talking about threat. We should be talking about risk, because a risk can be a threat. And what I keep seeing on the internet is marketing, right? We're being marketed to constantly, and I hate having marketing conversations. I want to have, I'm an IT nerd. I want to have data conversations. I want to have evidence. I'm a penetration tester, and so my entire career has been people coming to me with the question of prove it. So what? Let me see it. Show me.
I think we have two great perspectives here, because we have the offensive perspective from Johnny and also a defensive perspective from a CISO. You both are living in production, so I think that is kind of tying it all together. How are you all using AI? Johnny, I would love to hear how you're using it from an offensive side of the house, so let's start with you.
So that's a really great question. It's a very delicate situation, because when you are pointing AI at your production infrastructure, honestly, it's been really great at knowing when to not, well, how to be delicate itself, knowing when to not use exploits that are going to knock anything over. And what? Let me walk that back and talk about utilization of AI as a penetration tester, as a human being. A lot of the problems I see where people say AI is dangerous stem from the operator not understanding or not having the proper mentality about what the tool is and what it can do and what it's going to do. In this context, when I was first going to university, my absolute first, my C# professor, on the first day, he read us a poem, and it goes, I really hate this computer. I think I'm going to sell it. It never does what I want it to, only what I tell it. And I have never been hearing that echoed more than I have right now with AI. The best way I've been able to figure out to make people understand the context of AI is, every time you spin up a new session, this thing is in a vacuum. It has no idea who you are, what you do, where it is, what the environment is like. And so if you tell it, hey, here's a URL for an application, I need you to find vulnerabilities in it. Generally, depending on the model and the system prompt that the vendor has put into it, it's generally going to go to town on this thing. If you need it to be delicate, if you need it to not do brute forcing or DOS attacks, if you need it to avoid certain pages, if you need it to not do active exploitation at all, depending again on the model, you have to tell it this. You have to prepare lengthy system prompts for these types of engagements, and you should have those stored. I have a repository here of prompts like that for beginning different types of engagements, just strictly for safety, to make sure the AI understands that, just to get the AI on the same page. Treat it like an absolute genius 6-year-old. It's a 6-year-old who could do anything, but man, they do not have the experience of existing in the world that makes them make good executive decisions. And so you have to control those and set those rules. Now, that said, we also have the problem of, where is this AI running? Where does the data go? This AI, especially by way of exploitation, may in fact gain access to intellectual property, proprietary data, PI, things like that. And it's going to then ingest that and put that in its context on a server you don't own somewhere, potentially leveraging a contract that says that the vendor is allowed to ingest and train their AI on that data. Now, I run a company who's based entirely around recipes. You get our recipes, you can clone our food, we're dead, we're gone. What if it gains access to recipe repos and starts ingesting those? And now that's being trained. You got to remember, these AI, these models, they're black boxes. They're black boxes to the vendor. Anthropic will tell you, we have no idea what's going on inside Claude. Isn't that cool? But it's ingesting everything and retraining itself constantly. That's where these new models come from. And so that's what you have to be actively concerned with. And so right now, we are not pointing AI at anything that is not public facing, and we're being very cautious with active exploitation to ensure that even if the exploit exists, that it would be able to migrate from a public application to recipe data, which, as far as I can tell, is impossible. But you don't guarantee that. that it would never be able to actually read. It would never read that data and never have access to it. And really, we're in the very early stages of just beginning to play with it. We're doing POC level stuff right now, just being exceptionally cautious. And that's again coming from me, someone who's a real big proponent of AI. I am not. I'm not against it. I think it is the future, and she's got to really understand the tool and use it properly. It's the machine gun. It's the invention of the machine gun. It changed warfare. It changed civil defense forever. But you can very easily murder your entire family.
Yeah. We on the other hand, we worked with our MSSP partner, especially one that runs our XDR service, to develop kind of agentic workflows that, and I think it's kind of probably the way forward that's now going. So pretty much agentic workflow removed the level 1 analysts out of the picture. So essentially it does the first pass triage. It enriches all of the incidents, look at the IP addresses, look at all of the user behavior analytics and all of that. And I think the one thing that AI is really powerful, it can sift through vast amounts of data really fast and build patterns. But the one thing where what Johnny said, the one thing where we're really conscious, so we specifically in that agentic workflow build out displayed decision tree, and then there is a human in a loop in that decision tree that gives feedback to agentic workflow every time it investigates an incident. So it creates a sort of force feedback loop that allows to it improve and get more efficient in solving incidents. But I think it also has another side effect, which I think we really talk about it and which I kind of love. If you think about Security Operations Center, that's probably the roles that leads to the most amount of burnout. So what we're doing is we're removing the most difficult level 1 tasks that's tedious, generic, and leads to burnout, and allowing humans to investigate incidents that are more interesting and allows them to do more sort of human intelligence and focus on their brain activities, where we leave the sort of low level hanging fruit to AI. And then obviously, hopefully in the near future, we can elevate that to the next level. But that's kind of the place where we are working at now.
I'm glad that we talked about tier 1 possibly being replaced, or maybe the better word is reimagine. There's well-documented processes that tier 1 analysts follow, and it's the exact same path for BAS and exposure management and also the adversary. Everyone's following documented processes and formal workflows from some perspective. I would love to hear from you both on where breach and attack simulation stands today.
I think it's improving a lot. I think the biggest difficulty we had previously, and everyone struggled to answer, is we had masses of vulnerabilities, thousands. And whenever you went to IT, asked to patch them, they said, we can't patch them all. Can you do analysis and tell us which ones are the most important? So you always were fighting a battle. And I think that's where breach and attack simulation and attack surface management and all of those tools came in to provide context, to provide actionable information. Because that was the real gap. You talk to someone, especially someone who works in big businesses. I know a person who created AppSec tool because they were on average handling 2 million vulnerabilities in a month. Absolutely unsustainable. But if you can go down that funnel and reduce 2 million to may say, let's say a couple hundred that are really exploitable, and there is a reason why in security we talk about onion and overlapping defenses, because most of them is going to stop half of these vulnerabilities in its track. So we need to have actionable intelligence that informs how we proceed with them, what needs to be fixed, and what needs to be fixed soon. There is a reason why we inbuilt in our contractual obligations, SLAs and things like that. But they only are important to ones that are actually, it needs fixing. And I think, I'm just reading a great book by Antonio Barroso talking about, how to report that to the boardroom. And,
what is this book? You have to tell us. You can't, you're going to get us excited. Oh, literally, I got it.
Yeah,
I think that's
he just sent me
fantastic.
a link.
Love a good book.
Yeah, it's a great book, but it's about the art of reporting risk to the boards. And we are all technical people. We came from a background where we used to love talking vulnerabilities, numbers. You can't do that to the boards anymore. So the goal is how to learn to translate that into risk that potentially derails your production, impacts regulation, compliance, and contractual obligations. That's where the conversation is going. And if the tools allow you to have better risk conversations, they're going to be amazing companion in our way forward.
Absolutely. This comes all the way back to the prove it, the show me aspect of everything. And I love being able to, one, put that back onto the controls team when they say, oh, well, we have a defense for that. And I get to say, let's prove it. Show me that that's true, or let me show you that that's not true. Breach and attack simulation has taken so much of that work off of um, everyone's lap. Let's go back to my favorite success story is Log4j. Log4j crops up. We're using, Wiz, which says you have 400 instances of Log4j in your environment. So of course, incident response team, this is a P1, everybody is on a call. We've got this all the way up to the CIO on this call going, are we dead? What's happening? What does our risk look like? And then my job as the penetration tester, as the security assessor, is to come in and figure out, okay, what actually is a risk? I love to say that the job of security assessment, the job of the penetration tester, is to find the delta between what should be and what is, and then give that delta to the controls team to be able to develop compensatory controls. Because everybody likes to say, well, we should be protected. CrowdStrike should stop that. Should. They love this should word. And they like to use should to mean will. And it's my job, it's the red team's job to figure out what will happen. And having a tool, any kind of breach and attack simulation tool, has been so great for that. And then it's been so great for being able to guide the blue teams, to guide IT architecture, the IT teams, to what they should be patching, what they should focus on, to recategorize those vulnerabilities. I work in a company where it's common to have 200 critical vulnerabilities on any given day out there. This is normal because of how fast these things happen. And so now what we have to do is, we have to prioritize the criticals. It used to be, criticality used to be the prioritization mechanism, and now it's not. Low, medium, high, critical, that's not enough tiers. Right? So now we're prioritizing the criticals. And how do you prioritize? Well, you based on risk. And how do you determine risk? Testing. And that's what we're doing here. And it's been so great to be able to, again, and then go all the way back to bringing the numbers, bringing the data to leadership and say, here are the actual numbers. Here is the evidence that you don't have to trust me or my knowledge or experience and hope that I'm right. We can look at what the computers are doing, because the computers do not, they don't have so much leeway. I also love that in this day and age, my big controversial statement I like to throw around lately is that middle management is dead. There is no more middle management. It's expected that senior management, executive, it's pushing into the executive range. You must still be technical. You must still be a practitioner. I love that I have been able to take my practitioner capabilities all the way to the level that I'm at, and that they are expected of me. I thrive on that. There's so many people who just, back in the day, used to be able to show up to work at every day, know your theory, understand the foundational information, and then have a good personality. And now you're going to become a middle manager, and then you can just coast there the rest of your career, do nothing, approve timesheets, do goal reviews, and then retire. And that is gone. You still see that in some old ancient companies who are doing things, and I'll say it, the wrong way. But I love that the practitioners are now being lifted up. You still need that leadership capability. You still need to understand the business. You still need to be able to talk to the board, even though you may not ever actually directly talk to the board. You need to know how to speak that language. You need to understand what the business cares about. You understand, how does it generate revenue? What does ROI look like for the business? And that's how you communicate risk, is you talk about risk to the business, risk to the dollar, risk to the bottom line, because That's their job. The board's job, especially in a publicly traded company, is to report to the shareholders. How are we making money? Why are we not making so much money? What money is at risk? And what are we doing to assuage that risk? And so being able to give them the data around that, through all the way back through breach and attack simulation, and saying, we're not actually at as big of a risk as you thought, enables them to act in a little bit more risky of a manner. Because again, a board, you have to gamble, you have to take risks to push the business forward. And so when you can enable them to be more at ease and saying, like, look, it's actually not as bad as you thought. And then being able to say it's way better than you thought, because now we're prioritizing these critical vulnerabilities and patching the ones that are actually exploitable in our environment. We're actually in a pretty good place. And this is not opinion. This is not my take on it. This is not me saying, well, at my last company, it was like this and it was fine. This is me showing you their ports and going, look, this is not exploitable. Should we still patch it? 100%. Absolutely. But we can prioritize patching the things that can get us hacked. And once we've done that, then we'll start focusing on the other things.
Yeah. Just to add one thing, it kind of rattled my brain about one thing. I think cybersecurity as an industry is notorious for doing firefighting. And what I mean by that is when we're talking about vulnerabilities, we're spending more money and more resources to try to fix more things. But rarely anyone stops to think about, how do we prevent them from happening in the first place? Because there is a growth of vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, and all of that where you can't anymore fix them. So unless you can prevent them from happening in the first place, it comes a point where you're dead.
Yes, absolutely. That exploitation is what we need to be stopping. And if you can make it so that a vulnerability can't be exploited, it practically doesn't matter. Now you still have to worry about your O-day situations, your interesting attack paths. Yeah, but if you can eliminate, everything that you can eliminate, you reduce that risk. And yeah, you're right. Like you said, you stop the firefighting and you put yourself into a proactive phase.
All right, we're about to give everyone a promotion at their job. You guys are all about to get raises here in the audience, because this conversation is exactly how you progress. It's how you show the most value. You should be taking notes. We have some questions coming in, and one of the first questions reads, how are you all using Pocus? If I were to adopt Pocus tomorrow, how do I start seeing that value? And what does that mean for your organization?
I think, first of all, we mentioned, breach and attack simulation, and actually being able to show the data, plugging in your environments and getting actionable intelligence about what's exploitable, what's not. And actually, you can take that data, as Johnny was talking about. It's not, it becomes about hypothetical 10 CVEs. We are actionable intelligence that allows us to work on actual metrics and, reduce the number of work, essentially, because we can focus and narrow down our scope and work to what really matters and what causes the biggest amount of risk. So then, that conversation becomes very easy, because I mentioned earlier, you go to IT, you go to asset owners and asking them to fix certain vulnerabilities, certain misconfigurations or problems, that conversation becomes difficult without data. But you can show actual data, actual attack paths, and actual consequences of what happens when things are not being fixed. And that conversation, flips on its head. So yeah, and then you can document, make people accountable, and actually, improve companies' posture.
So now we've got it fully onboarded. I've been using the absolute heck out of it. Originally, what I had done is I looked at SCV, the security control validation, because this was really an attempt to just get a lot of what I called garbage work off my plate, which was, things like, well, we stood up a new environment, we stood up some new servers, stood up new XYZ. It requires a security assessment. And the security assessment is often, they like to call it a penetration test, but the reality is that it's like, okay, this environment's only slightly different than the environment we've already confirmed is really difficult to get anywhere inside of by way of, using gold images, approved architecture, et cetera, et cetera. We're a very mature organization. And so like it doesn't really need any extreme level of testing because we've already done it on a replicated infrastructure. What they need to do is just confirm that everything is the way it should be. We confirm literally, like I said, what is. And so being able to throw the control validation in and give a report back that says, look, here's what it tried, here's what succeeded, here's what failed. And then it's again, it's not up to me to say whether that's a pass or fail, which is fantastic. I could say, here's the risk. Does the whatever relevant security team approve this risk so that this application, this whatever you have, this architecture can go into production? Once I had that in place and we started looking at this, and I brought the output, the general output of that to the security leadership team. And I said, hey, we're also testing just our general architecture. Here's the output. We have security controls that are missing so many known malicious attacks, known malicious behaviors. Our controls are just not picking this up. That really lit a fire under them. And it was fantastic to see. It's been such a cool place to work ever since that. It's like night and day. Once we implemented the SCV, and I don't want to sound like I'll say it all. I'm not being paid by Pocus to say this. In fact, I pay a lot of money to use Pocus. The being able to say, look, CrowdStrike says, what does CrowdStrike say? They stop everything, right? CrowdStrike says, we protect your environment, protect your endpoints. We're the best out there. The best out, maybe they even are the best out there. Who's to say? Maybe Pocus has that data. What I can say is that the best does not mean perfect. And I think everybody in security agrees with that. Nobody thinks CrowdStrike is perfect. Nobody thinks Zscaler is perfect. Nobody thinks any security control is perfect. But what do they have to do? They have to vibe it. They have to vibe check it and go, we think it's pretty good. It seems to be doing well. And you never want to hear think or seems in a data center conversation. So what Pocus allows me to do, the SCV, is that I can take the data and go, here's what it stops, here's what it does not stop. And it's not just a matter of testing those controls. Like, yeah, that's the first step is CrowdStrike able to stop this known PowerShell based C2? What it's also finding is configuration problems. What we found was things like, hey, CrowdStrike isn't sending all of its logs to our SIEM. Why? And I go to the CISO and he goes, I don't know. I've never heard of that. I have no idea why. Go talk to the SIEM team. And then, we get that sorted out. Or I discovered an entire WAF in our organization that was just not used, literally turned on, not used. And it was because we weren't getting logs from it. And I said, why is this thing not sending logs? And I go to the AppSec team and they go, oh, that's actually because we never onboarded any applications to it. And then I take that to the CISO and I go, hey, did you know about this? And he goes, no. And now there's a massive project that's underway to get that fixed. Like finding those things, like forget CrowdStrike, don't forget it. That's absolutely where you should start testing your controls. But like we forget what controls are. We think of EDR, we think of endpoint protection. We don't think of, is the SIEM getting everything? Is the WAF turned on? And it's finding stuff like this was just amazing. And then what I discovered after we had that all working was that the vulnerability, let's call it vulnerability prioritization tools that we were using didn't work. They were not ingesting properly. They were not getting all of the information, or they were hiding information or not representing it. They would get it in the API and the GUI would never show it, things like this. And I discovered this through I just on a whim, I was like, let's do an ASV, an attack surface validation POC here. It was Christmas break. Nobody's doing anything. It's, let's screw around with this. And the TVM team looked at it and was like, oh my God, this is what we need. This is what, but we have two things that do this. Why don't they show me what this shows me? And so then you have to find that delta. Is Pocus wrong? Could be. Absolutely. Pocus is not perfect. And so going in and comparing the three and saying, this is looking at you just look at the logs. Logs don't lie, right? PCAPs don't lie. And saying this is, this other tool is not showing the data that we need. And so that sparked a whole lot of conversation. And so and then all of this back down to like, if I said, if you're going to start doing breach and attack simulation, where do you start? you got to do the SCV, the security control validation, and the ASV, the attack surface validation combo. You need both because all the other tools, even if you have that like vulnerability prioritization tool, how is it prioritizing? Everything else out there is just taking what the result of an exploitation is. They're recategorizing the criticals. They're breaking them down into 9.1, 9.2, 9.3. Pecus, doing control validation informs it, this is not going to be successful in your environment. You know, if somebody attempts to exploit this, even in the case of like they can get to the server, they can execute code as this type of user on the server, but CrowdStrike's going to stop it. Zscaler is going to stop the exfiltration. We've confirmed this. It's not, oh, they should stop it. So we've confirmed it happens. That allows you to deprioritize that critical and work on something where the control validation says this will be successful if someone discovers it. That's what you need to action. So unless you know what will be successful and what will not be successful based on data, your prioritization of your vulnerabilities is borders on silly.
Yeah. And I'm just going to add one thing. I just made a post, I think 3 days ago, which leads perfectly into that. I was talking about, company received ISO 27001, and then they got breached 3 days later. And then all of the executives ask why. And there's important sentence I mentioned there. ISO 27001 validates the existence of controls, but not actually whether they work or not the quality of the controls. And I think that's where the important gap is with Picus can potentially, cover, because, that kind of offers false sense of security. Companies think that, you got this certificate, but it's compliance. It's not security. If you want to do proper security, there's a next level up that you need to go from there.
It's crazy we're still having that conversation. The regulatory frameworks, that is the please at least just do this. If you're doing one thing, get here. And you look at the security maturity models, any of them, all of them say if you've implemented a security framework of any type, that puts you at like level 2, that does not put you at level 4 or 5. It says, okay, you've implemented a framework. Good start. You have a long way to go.
All right, we have one last question from the audience, and I think it's a great way to wrap up. It's more of a hot take question. If someone in the audience is still validating quarterly or yearly one-off pen tests, what's the one thing that you tell them to do this week?
If they're doing quarterly pen tests, they probably already know network pen testing is dead. There's your hot take. Network pen testing is dead. That's my succinct answer. And it's because we've got so many controls in place. Now, if you're successfully finding things in your network pen tests, great, you should be doing that. But that's such a level 1 thing to be doing. You should do it. And you need to find those gaps, but those are level 1 gaps. If you're doing it quarterly and you're seeing that come up with like, one finding a quarter, cool, great. What's next? Let's go. It's time to use that stepping stone. Now you've got a stable stepping stone to get yourself to the next level. So how's that? I'll stop there.
I've been talking about this a lot, whether it's, vulnerability management, whether it's pen testing, whether it's risk assessment. If you work in a waterfall juggernaut and you're changing a code every 6 months, that might be viable. But anyone's in this new world where we talk, we live in an agile environment, probably dropping code changes 100 times a day. So if you do an annual pen test, the delta between what you tested and what you haven't is absolutely massive. So, and I talk about the same thing about whether it's risk assessment, anything, that you're doing periodically, it's point in time assessment, but the delta between now and then, it's massive. So, I think we need to move towards everything being continuous and continually reassessing, revalidating. Threat landscape is changing daily. You can't revert to the back old days.
What's funny is that's something we've been saying since the old days. the shift left, the continuous and CI/CD should include continuous security testing. Been saying that for 20 years. And it's and I'm not saying that Marius isn't up to date. I'm saying this is still a problem. I'm agreeing. Yes, guys, come on.
Well, you look at any frameworks and any contractual obligations, they all require annual pen tests.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But look at how often those get updated, because it's extremely difficult to amend and update a framework, especially NIST, ISO 27001. Do you know what it takes to update an ISO? Well, you got to make a new one, really, is what it is.
And the problem is that kind of, I think, separates the companies that, show, I always say this, they show appearance of security versus those who actually do security.
Yeah. Security theater. They're actors. They like to put on the costume and sing some songs, but they're just pretending to be the people who are really doing it.
This session was incredible. I got to have you both on my podcast. A big thank you to Johnny and Marius for being so generous with their time and also with the real talk. Two things that I'm walking away with is stop firefighting and start moving into prevention rather than just the appearance of security. That's the whole game. And that's a wrap for the Autonomous Validation Summit 2026. A huge thank you to all of the speakers, David, Yingting, Vulcan, Johnny, Marius, for showing up and bringing that heat. And of course, a big thank you to you all for joining us and dropping all of your questions into the chat. If you have any final pieces, don't hesitate to drop it into the chat or send an emails to the Pika security team. They also wanted me to extend a huge thank you to you for showing up and attending and participating in this session. So today's session has made the case very clear. Attackers are moving at the machine speed. What is machine speed? It means really, really fast. And we need to be able to keep up. The future of cybersecurity is continuous, and we've heard that throughout every session today. The teams that are winning the most are the teams with the tools, and they're the ones also with the evidence. Thank you for spending the day with us. Stay sharp, stay curious, and we'll catch you next time.